So let's think about what are these symptoms and disease presentations we see with mitochondrial dysfunction. Where don't you see mitochondrial dysfunction? If we really think about this, where don't we see this? And once you start seeing energy, you can't unsee it. And I think, as the data continues to accumulate, most metabolic conditions, most diseases of chronic aging have a mitochondrial dysfunction component. Remember, we said oxidative stress goes up just with aging alone, controlling for all other factors. So we see a tremendous amount of challenges. The areas where mitochondrial disease manifests first, and we'll go into this more in depth in the energy module, but is with neurologic tissue. Because think of the brain. You know, the brain is only about 2 or 3% of your body's mass, but it consumes about 23% of your daily energy. Right? 23% of your daily energy. So it's incredibly taxed. And all the nervous tissue, peripheral neurons, so peripheral neuropathies, and the manifestations of brain function are some of the first things to send a signal that, hey, these mitochondria may be hurting. Hey, look at mitochondria. So we see that injury, aging, inflammation all impair mitochondria. And impaired mitochondria, in part, then go ahead and continue to impair cellular function. The brain is uniquely vulnerable to oxidative damage. Oy, oy, oy. Because multiple sources of oxidative stress are occurring, right? You're making all this energy, and there's some leak of the oxygen, and therefore that leakage has to be dealt with. There's a lot of metals present, so it's a very redox active tissue. Monoamines, dopamine auto-oxidizes into a free radical. So, getting very high dopamine levels causes an impairment of mitochondrial function. I think one of the things that meditation does, and rest and recovery, is it gives us time to recover from our dopamine load. Right? Isn't our world filled with dopamine load? Right? Our cell phones, every time we swipe to kind of get an update, that's giving us a dopamine hit. They're terribly addictive devices. Glutamate endotoxicity. So when a cell dies, it releases glutamate out and will actually injure and harm other cells nearby. The brain doesn't have a great antioxidant reserve. It's hard to get a lot of the polyphenols and the dietary antioxidants into the brain because of the blood-brain barrier. So it needs the enzymes of antioxidation to really do their work. And it doesn't have much catalase. And mitochondria in the brain also lack catalase. So the resident immune cells, the microglia, can cause inflammation on their own and a cascade of oxidative function. So this is one of the reasons, these multitude of reasons is why we see mitochondrial dysfunction often manifesting first in neurologic tissue. The brain also doesn't have any tolerance for blood flow disruptions. You see oxygen levels go down, 4 minutes till you're brain dead. Limited regeneration. That's actually a field I'm working in, is neuroregeneration through activating body-wide stem cells. It's a whole lot of fun. But there are limited areas in the brain by which you can turn on neurogenesis. Circuit-based function. So the brain is a network of networks. It is the most beautiful system of systems that there are. And when we do connectomic mapping in the clinic, do quantitative EEG and volumetric MRI and see where the tissue in the brain, how it's organized and how it ties together, a lesion in one part of the brain can cause a dysfunction in multiple networks simultaneously. And therefore, the symptom complex that comes with that becomes pretty hard. People often don't even note that there's a distinct problem going on. It's just that everything doesn't seem to work quite as good as it did before. Like, oh, I hit that birthday. You get those comments. And then the brain is very aging sensitive, and it has a very high amount of polyunsaturated fatty acids. DHA makes up, I think, about 30% of the fatty acid content of the brain. You don't have, but these are highly sensitive molecules. DHA enables which is, found in marine, in algae and marine oils, causes that membrane to be very fluid, but it's also a very delicate fat and easily oxidized, easily damaged, and such. So the brain has a high unique sensitivity to mitochondrial dysfunction. So what goes on? So let's think about some studies with regard to Alzheimer's disease. And if you look for it, mitochondrial dysfunction is present in virtually every model of what we would say causes Alzheimer's disease. Is it all that Alzheimer's disease is? No. Alzheimer's is very clearly a multiple system failure that goes on with a final common tissue endpoint. But if we don't address mitochondrial dysfunction, we're certainly not going to get the benefit that we could from slowing neurodegeneration. So we've kind of talked about all the different tissues that are involved. We see chronic heart failure and vascular disease are consequences of mitochondrial dysfunction and the impaired oxidative phosphorylation. We see that if mitochondrial gene expression is altered, we get vascular disease, insulin, diabetes, fatty acid metabolism causes, again, insulin resistance. Mitochondrial dysfunction creates inflammation with more atherosclerosis. It causes enhancement of insulin resistance with end tissue damage and increases reactive oxygen species, which end up causing more vascular disease. So we have the dysfunction of one organelle, one energy-producing system that has many different ways. It will then impair the function of tissues and organs. And again, this is why a single pill for an ill strategy of understanding fails here. And why you're thinking, I'm going to take this pill and that's going to fix it, is really never going to be the answer. Or just taking one thing out is going to be the answer. So if we think about how do we actually have insulin resistance? How does mitochondrial dysfunction create insulin resistance? I'm going to come to this slide because I think it's a perfect storm. Glucose, with insulin resistance going up, glucose is unable to enter the cell. So glucose starts to build up outside of the cell. Beta oxidation now starts to become impaired. So remember, high glucose going to impair beta oxidation. Now you get lipid accumulation inside of those cells, and inside the cells of the muscle, the heart, the liver. And now those cells are not going to function as they should. Gluconeogenesis becomes inhibited, so the cell can't make its own glucose internally either. So here we have the glucose can't come in because of insulin resistance. And now the cell can't make its own glucose. Its fatty acids can't be broken down with beta oxidation. We're seeing the cells being starved. And then if the cell is starved, now we have the Krebs cycle intermediates start to be depleted. And the only way for the cell to survive is to start breaking down muscle so that it can fill its Krebs cycle intermediates again. So it can use those two carbon chains from protein in the production of energy. And so now we see the breakdown of protein, the accumulation of intracellular fat, and all of these are the result of energy deficit, of that signal, the body basically looking at this being flooded with energy, right? There's too much glucose coming in. Well, we need to put the governor on. We need to stop that sugar from coming inside the cell. Intracellular hypoglycemia, leading to the destruction of proteins, and really a perfect storm that leads then to intracellular energy deficits, which then cause heart failure, obesity, kidney failure, diabetic peripheral neuropathy, retinopathy, cachexia, fatty liver. We see all of these manifestations of this thing we've called the diabetes, which is not really a thing at all. It's an end stage of a multifactorial process that has occurred. And when we name something, we say, oh, this is diabetes, we have to make sure that that's only the beginning of our questioning. Then we say, oh, you have diabetes. Now, what's the why behind that? Instead, naming something should not be the end of your thought. A diagnosis should be the beginning of examination, not the end of our considerations. So, type 2 diabetes, we see that the mitochondria in type 2 diabetes in patients are small. They have reduced contents. They have impaired electron transport activity. These folks are in a world of hurt. It is going to take time to recover. And I think educating patients about the fact that their body has adapted in a way to get them to where they are, and it's going to take time to readapt that, but it's totally doable. Diabetes is such a reversible condition. And obese individuals are struggling. They are suffering from an intracellular energy deficit. And those neurons, even the neurons that control cravings, have an energy deficit. So those are called the medium spiny neurons in the nucleus accumbens, and they control your task-positive reward system. So if you have energy depletion, you can't help that dopamine, you can't help the cravings that go on in near that fashion. So breaking a cycle here and enabling better intracellular energy capacity and production is imperative in getting over this hump. So, the compassion that is needed in the realm of obesity and diabetes must be huge, because these neurons are suffering. The very mechanisms that are causing their manifestations, they're coming for attention, are also causing problems with regard to cravings and the fatigue that they're trying to deal with increased food intake. So cancer. Cancer cells have increased aerobic glycolysis, so they're not utilizing the Krebs cycle to make energy in the same way a non-cancer cell would. And so one of the strategies is using a ketotic diet, especially in certain cancers. There's a tremendous amount of data manifesting in this about ketosis, improving decreasing symptoms that of individuals going through chemotherapy, of slowing the growth of cancers. And so if you can just decrease the amount of glucose that's available and cause a ketotic environment to occur, there can be benefit. If you're doing that, and only if you're doing that, then you have to be cautious about the amount of protein coming in. Because glutamine and several other amino acids can, like I've shown you, can be broken down as alternative sources to make glucose. So glutamine, when individuals are in these very high ketotic diets, for the purpose of cancer, what's been focused on is also paying attention to glutamine intake. The net effect is to rapidly, if you have enough precursors, you make more amino acids, nucleotides, and lipids for rapid cell proliferation. But a very complex topic. Please don't, that was just a brief introduction that we don't often think of cancer. We think of cancer as a genetic disease, but it's really a metabolic disease. I would refer you to a textbook written by Thomas Seyfried called Cancer as a Metabolic Disease. I am going to warn you, it is not light reading. It's exceedingly well done basic science, and Thomas Seyfried continues to do some very good science and investigation in this field. I don't think this is this strategy is not a cure-all. Absolutely. I think there will be certain tumors and individuals that will be helped more than others, and some possibly that could be harmed. So I think stepping back and thinking about how this can work is amazing. So there's so many great treatment strategies plans that can improve mitochondrial function. And what I would encourage you all is to have more danishes. Because that's job security for us. And so, so we already talked about the sticky buns as one of the producers of inflammation and oxidative stress. So anything that's going to cause caloric excess, high fructose, too much alcohol, is going to cause mitochondrial dysfunctions. Trans fats. over 2 sequential generations of rats caused oxidative damage and preference for amphetamine. So high trans fat consumption in the grandmother still increased the desire for amphetamines in the grand pups of that rat. Isn't that astounding? The generational effects that could be possible with our diet are profound. One of the greatest things is I've been looking at fatty acid analysis for almost 20 years now, and to see the huge decline in the general amount of trans fats that we measure in patients' blood has been a huge win. I think we've done a good job of getting that word out. Advanced glycation end products. So one of the greatest dietary therapies is lack of diet. So fasting, intermittent fasting, ketosis, many particular aspects to this, but I will say all of it is helpful. And what is exactly the right way for an individual patient is going to depend on that individual patient. The ketogenic diet mimics a fasting state. It switches our metabolism from glucose to the metabolism of ketones. The ketogenic diet in the pediatric neurology world is a 4-to-1 fat to carbohydrate diet. And it's been used for a long time for the treatment of intractable seizures in children and adolescents. I'm just going to have to change this. Mechanism of action unknown, because I think we're actually getting to where the mechanism of action is. Ketogenic diet is important in treatment of drug-resistant epilepsy. We have data for Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease, brain tumors, migraines, autism spectrum, TBI, and stroke. There may be utility in these areas. Because why? Why? The ketogenic diet, you're going to increase beta oxidation. You're going to shift the production of energy down through the Krebs cycle, and you're going to improve mitochondrial activity. You're going to upregulate PGC1 alpha. Intermittent fasting is mimicking, ketogenesis is mimicking the fasting state to upregulate mitochondrial mass and efficiency. So there are several different, we can measure blood concentrations of ketones under various conditions, and compared to a normal state, fasting, carb-restricted diet, and diabetic ketoacidosis, the different levels of beta-hydroxybutyrate, acetoacetate, and acetone will vary. And if we're thinking of it's important to look at diabetic ketoacidosis, we're looking at 3-beta-hydroxybutyrate at levels of 10 to 20, as opposed to fasting getting down to 5 to 8, or a carb-restricted diet 5 to 8. So we're not looking at ketoacidosis and a negligible increase of acetone and acetoacetate in normal the fasting state of a normal physiology. So the ketogenic diet reduces inflammation. It downregulates NF-kappa B, enhances mitochondrial proliferation. It makes more ATP, less reactive oxygen species, reduces apoptosis, because those mitochondria are not being damaged. They're not sending that hara-kiri signal to the cell to commit apoptosis. It improves insulin sensitivity, increases leptin sensitivity. That's a pretty good list, isn't it? Would you agree that's a pretty good list? Intermittent fasting, less food, is one of our most powerful dietary interventions that we can bring forth. And it's certainly not one that has any barriers towards cost. Looking for a low-cost therapy? An empty plate is really powerful. So when we think, I mentioned about ketogenesis and why it helps in pediatric seizures. Fascinating study, and I want to encourage you to go get this actual reference and read through it. Very complex science. But it turns out that the effectiveness of the ketogenic diet in the mediation of seizures has everything to do with the particular gut microbiota that is present in that individual patient. And certainly there's several groups that are racing towards trying to find that bacteria that can be utilized to improve the effectiveness of a ketogenic diet in the decrease of seizures. But really cool basic science of thinking of our gut actually enabling or disenabling the effectiveness of a particular diet for a particular condition. Wow. Talk about a beautiful system, right? So this is our mitochondrial food plan. This is available in the toolkit, and it emphasizes lots of brightly colored fruits and vegetables, high quality fats, adequate protein, not high protein, but adequate protein. And it's anti-inflammatory, low glycemic, gluten-free, low green. There's an option on there to have low or no dairy. And this is a remarkable plan for individuals that are challenged with mitochondrial dysfunction. Our food plan features reduced carbs and ketogenic option. There's several different there's several different flavors to the mitochondrial food plan to be able to modify it towards a particular patient's needs or that particular patient's capacity. A diversity of phytonutrient-rich foods and vegetables is essential, and a goal of kind of one or two of each color a day. Moderate exercise for 4 months, increased mitochondrial density 67%, 55% in cardiolipin content, increase in complex 4, which is that step right next to complex, to the electron, or it's the end point of dealing with this, these electrons that are building up from complex 1 and 2. And they're all linked to an improvement in hemoglobin A1C and fasting blood glucose. Is it fun to step back now and see why exercise might be so imperative for type 2 diabetes? When you're looking through the lens of the mitochondria as that mechanistic middle ground of how you connect this behavior with this particular disease, it's powerful. And there's no option. Sometimes when people ask me if I do alternative medicine, I said, well, no, I practice no alternative medicine. There's no alternative for you moving. There's no alternative for you eating fresh fruits and vegetables. There's no alternative to getting enough sleep. There's no alternative to dealing with the stress in your life. There's no that's the kind of medicine that I believe in, no alternative medicine. So when we think of, there's many different ways that we can improve mitochondrial function and activity. So, for instance, when ATP is depleted, caloric exercise, caloric restriction, cold temperatures, we turn on AMPK, we turn on sirtuins. Those turn on PGC1 alpha, which increases mitochondrial biogenesis. You can also do this with phytonutrients. What's fascinating is many of these compounds in foods, alpha-lipoic acid, berberine, curcumin, quercetin, resveratrol, pterostiltine, green tea polyphenols, turn on AMPK. They turn on sirtuin, the same mechanisms that behavior does, which turn on PGC1 alpha and has predictable effects. So, better mitochondrial function, less reactive oxygen species, better energy, better exercise performance, less body fat, more muscle, decreased age-related degeneration, possibly increased lifespan, cancer suppression. There are several phytochemicals that are very helpful in the support of mitochondrial dysfunction. We've listed several here. There's multiple mechanisms of action. Some of my favorites are curcumin, sulforaphane glucosinolate, resveratrol, green tea polyphenols. If we think about mitochondrial dysfunction, N-acetylcarnitine. So carnitine is that shuttle that brings fats into the mitochondria. Alpha-lipoic acid stabilizes ATP, enables ATP synthase to work. CoQ10 is the shuttle. Low CoQ10, higher risk of sudden cardiac death in the case of heart failure. Magnesium, N-acetylcysteine, creatinine, melatonin. So, and then I just want to end with kind of branched chain amino acids. I think this is fascinating. Just giving branched chain amino acids increased life expectancy by 12% in these mice. It increases the amount of mitochondria. Old mitochondria started looking like young mitochondria. There was decreased oxidative stress. Antioxidant enzyme systems were turned on. It did look like caloric restriction. And And so why those branched-chain amino acids are able to insert themselves in multiple areas of this electron transport chain. And you're turning on enzyme, the body thinks that it is in a growth state. It is well nourished with exposure to these branched-chain amino acids, and actually decreased fatigue in a clinical trial. But no matter what you're thinking of the components of your diet that's going to be effective, it's most important to use food first. This is where our nutrients come from. They are constant, and we want to increase the quality of our diet, increase the quality of our nutritional content, both on the macro and the micro level. So here's the summary slide. Eat a calorie-appropriate, phytonutrient-dense diet. Eat and drink colorful, antioxidant foods and beverages. Avoid toxins in foods, personal care products, house cleaning, medications. Consider caloric restriction, intermittent fasting, cold exposure, and challenge the brain and body with physical and cognitive exercise. The body is designed to adapt. And so we approach our patients, we have to say, be honest, how much are you exercising? The energy, now I hope that you're going to go out thinking about energy as a major part of the matrix, but actually which connects a lot of the matrix. Energy and the mitochondrial health in general have an amazing place in all of medicine. It doesn't matter what your specialty is, where you're coming from. You will have better outcomes, I believe, if we're paying attention to this remarkable subcellular structure. I want to say this as I'm closing. You are enough. All of this stuff could be overwhelming, right? But you picked up so much. It was fun to see your eyes light up as I'm up here. It's like, I got that. You know enough, and B, you're learning rapidly. You are enough to be what your patients need. Stepping in and being that for them. I want to encourage you. Sometimes you can feel discouraged when there's so much to learn, but you are enough. And you are on a path that is going to bring you great joy as you practice medicine. I can't begin to communicate how much I love practicing medicine, how much I enjoy every day getting to enter into this mystery of the human experience and getting to see what is next. And I'm so thankful to be on this path with you as a fellow learner. Thank you.